What if I told you there was a country that was at the same time a monarchy, an aristocracy, and a democracy? Ancient Rome is a perfect example. It had consuls who ruled like temporary kings, a senate controlled by elite families, and popular assemblies where citizens could vote. On paper, it wasn't just one system, it was a blend of several, all competing and balancing each other. And that raises an uncomfortable question. What about today? When you think about your own country, what it is really? A democracy, a republic, a constitutional monarchy, or something more complex behind the label? Because when people hear the word government, they imagine neat categories: democracy, monarchy, dictatorship. Like each country fits cleanly into a single box. But in reality, governments almost never work that way. A government isn't just a structure written in a constitution. It's a pattern of power, a set of habits, a balance between groups, institutions, and people. And sometimes it's simply a story repeated so often that it starts to feel true, even if reality looks different. So today we'll do two things at once. First, we'll go through the main types of government, quickly and clearly with real examples. And second, we'll look at the hidden idea most people miss, why the official label often matters far less than how power actually works in practice. Let's begin. Before we start naming systems and putting labels on countries, there's one brutally simple question: who actually holds power? Who can sign something, say something, or command something, and watch the entire system move? If you strip away all the titles and formal names, almost every government in history comes down to one core question: how many people are really in charge? And once you look at it that way, most systems fall into a few basic patterns. Sometimes power is concentrated in one person: a king, a dictator, a strong president, one center of gravity where the final word lives. Sometimes power sits with a small group, an elite circle, a party leadership, a military council, a handful of people making decisions behind closed doors. Sometimes power is spread across the population, directly or through representatives chosen in elections. At least in theory, the people are supposed to be the ultimate source of authority. And sometimes power is so fragmented that no one truly controls everything. Institutions block each other, courts challenge leaders, regions push back, decisions get stuck, slowed down, negotiated. Before you can understand any system, monarchy, democracy, dictatorship, republic, you first have to answer that one question: where does real power live? Let's start from monarchy. It is one of the oldest forms of government in the world. At its core, it's simple. The head of state is a monarch, usually a king, queen, or emperor, and the position is passed down through family lines. But that simple definition hides a huge difference in how monarchies actually work. In history, some monarchs ruled like living gods. Others had almost no real power at all. Today, monarchies exist in two very different forms. Constitutional monarchy. In a constitutional monarchy, the monarch remains the official head of state, but real political power is limited by law and carried out by elected leaders. The king or queen represents tradition, unity and continuity, but doesn't control daily politics. Examples: United Kingdom, Japan, Sweden, Spain and Netherlands. In the United Kingdom, for instance, the monarch opens parliament, signs laws and performs ceremonial duties. But the actual political engine is parliament and the prime minister. Laws are debated, budgets are set, and policies are created by elected officials. The monarch almost never interferes directly. Japan is another strong example. The emperor was once considered divine and held absolute authority. But after World War II, the system was redesigned. Today, the emperor is officially defined as a symbol of the state, with no governing power. Political decisions are made by the elected government. Historically, many countries shifted into this model after periods of conflict. In England, the power of the monarch was dramatically reduced after events like the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when Parliament asserted control and forced the monarchy to accept limits. Over time, real authority moved away from the crown and into elected institutions. You can think of a constitutional monarchy as a country that kept the crown but handed the steering wheel to the public. Strengths, stability and continuity across generations. A non-political national figure that represents unity. Smooth transitions of leadership without elections at the top level. Weaknesses. The monarchy still exists by birthright, not merit. Public money supports an unelected institution. Influence can still exist behind the scenes, even if unofficial. After monarchy, we move to a very different idea of power. If monarchy is built on inheritance, democracy is built on participation. Instead of asking who was born to rule, democracy asks a different question: who gave you the right to rule? The answer, at least in theory, is simple: the people. Democracy literally means rule by the people. The idea is that authority flows upward from citizens. Leaders don't own power, they borrow it. But even inside democracy, there are two very different ways this can work. First, direct democracy. Direct democracy is the most literal version of the idea. People vote directly on laws, policies, and major national decisions themselves. One of the earliest examples comes from ancient Athens. Citizens gathered to debate and vote on issues like war, spending, and leadership. But it's important to remember, not everyone counted as a citizen. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. So even early democracy had limits. Today, direct democracy is rare at the national level, because modern countries are simply too large. But you still see pieces of it. Switzerland is the strongest modern example. Citizens regularly vote in national referendums on real policies. Taxes, infrastructure, immigration rules, even changes to the constitution. If enough people sign a petition, a public vote can be triggered. Strength. People have immediate control over decisions. High sense of political participation. Weaknesses. Complex issues get reduced to simple yes-no votes. Decisions can be driven by emotion or short-term thinking. Because of these limits, most countries move toward a different version. Representative democracy. Instead of voting on every law, people choose representatives to make decisions for them. Examples: Norway, New Zealand, Germany, Canada, and many others. Citizens vote in elections. Those elected form governments, pass laws, negotiate budgets, and set national direction. If people are unhappy, they can replace them in the next election. This system evolved as countries grew larger and more complex. You simply can't run a modern nation through constant mass voting on every single decision. Strength. Legitimacy comes from public consent. Leadership can change without violence. Power is spread across institutions. Weaknesses. Slow decision-making. Constant political conflict and negotiation, risk of polarization and gridlock. And here's the uncomfortable truth: a democracy isn't protected by the word democracy. It's protected by habits, independent courts, free media, peaceful transfers of power, trust in elections, limit on leaders. When those habits are strong, democracy feels stable. When they weaken, the label can remain exactly the same, while the system underneath quietly starts to change. Republic. Now we move into a category that confuses a lot of people, because it sounds like it should be the opposite of monarchy or the opposite of democracy. But it isn't. If monarchy answers the question who rules with the royal family, then a republic answers it in a much simpler way: no monarch. A republic just means the country is not owned by king or queen. Leadership is held by representatives, elected or appointed, and the state is considered public, not personal property of a dynasty. That's it. And this is where it connects directly to what we just talked about. Democracy is about who gives power. A republic is about where power sits. You can have both at the same time, and many countries do, but they are not the same thing. A republic can take very different forms depending on how power is actually used. You can have a democratic republic, where leaders are chosen in competitive elections and power is limited by law. You can have an authoritarian republic, where leaders still hold official titles like president, but real competition and accountability are weak or tightly controlled. And you can even have something called a People's Republic, which sounds strongly democratic in name, but may function very differently in practice. Real examples make this clearer. France is a republic. There is no king. The president and government come from elections, and the system is built around public institutions. The United States is also a republic. The country was founded specifically to avoid monarchy, replacing a king with an elected president and a system of representatives. But then you have another example. China officially calls itself a republic, the People's Republic of China. There is no monarch, and leadership is structured through state institutions and party structures rather than a royal family. 3 countries, all republics, very different systems. Which brings us back to the pattern we've been seeing again and again. A republic is not a guarantee of democracy, it's just a statement about ownership of the state. The idea is that the country belongs to the public, not to one bloodline. But how power behaves inside the structure, how open it is, how limited it is, who truly makes decisions, that depends on everything else we've already talked about: institutions, habits, and real control. Autocracy and dictatorship. From here, we move into systems where power doesn't just exist at the top, but also concentrates there. If democracy spreads authority across society and institutions, autocracy pulls it inward toward a single center. Autocracy simply means that ultimate power rests with one person or with a very small ruling core that cannot easily be challenged. A dictatorship is a form of autocracy where that power is maintained through force, fear, censorship, or tightly controlled legitimacy. And this ties directly back to the first question we started with: who can actually decide things and make them stick? In an autocratic system, the answer becomes very clear: one leader, one circle, one source of final authority. Across different countries and time periods, similar patterns tend to appear when power concentrates this strongly. Opposition becomes weak, restricted, or banned entirely. Media is controlled or heavily influenced. The leader stands above the law rather than under it. Elections may still happen, but they function more like confirmation rituals than real competition. The structure may still have the appearance of institutions, but the ability to challenge power is limited. History offers some of the clearest examples. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union operated with highly centralized authority. Decisions made at the top reshaped the entire country. Industry, agriculture, internal security, and military direction, often at enormous human cost. There were few mechanisms that could slow or stop policies once they were set in motion. In Chile, after the 1973 coup, Augusto Pinochet ruled through military control, suppressing opposition and making rapid, top-down decisions without the friction of democratic processes. Different ideologies, different contexts, but a similar structure. Concentrated power that could move quickly and enforce compliance. This reveals both the strength and the danger of such systems. On one hand, decisions can be made fast, with clarity and coordination. There is less internal conflict, fewer delays, and policies can be implemented on a national scale almost immediately. On the other hand, when power is that concentrated, a single bad decision can expand into a national catastrophe, and there may be no institution strong enough to stop it or even question it. Totalitarianism. If autocracy is power concentrated at the top, totalitarianism is that idea pushed to its absolute extreme. It's not just about who rules, it's about how far that rule reaches. In a totalitarian system, the government doesn't limit itself to politics or laws, it tries to shape the entire environment people live in. The economy, culture, education, morality, private life, and even what people are supposed to believe about reality. The goal is no longer just obedience, it becomes something deeper, alignment. Not only follow the rules, but accept the story. Schools teach it, media repeats it, art reflects it, public life reinforces it. Over time, the system tries to close the gap between what people say in public and what they think in private. History gives very clear examples. In Nazi Germany, the state didn't just control the government and the military, it pushed a single ideology into education, youth organizations, media, science, and culture. Loyalty wasn't just expected in behavior, it was expected in identity. In the Stalinist Soviet Union, the state shaped not only political life, but also economic planning, public expression, and acceptable thought. Even art and literature were expected to serve the official narrative. Participation became a requirement of survival. A modern, often mentioned example is North Korea, where the state is deeply present in daily life. Public rituals, messaging, and controlled information all reinforced a single version of reality. The system doesn't simply want quiet citizens who stay out of trouble, it encourages visible loyalty and repeated participation. That's the key difference. Totalitarian power doesn't just want silence. Silence can hide resistance. Instead, it wants involvement. It wants people to repeat the message, perform loyalty and live inside the narrative until it starts to feel normal. Oligarchy. Oligarchy literally means rule by the few. It describes a system where real power sits not with the public and not with a single ruler, but with a small circle, often wealthy families, military elites, party insiders, or tightly connected business networks. And unlike monarchy or democracy, oligarchy is not always written into the constitution. It's more about how influence actually works in practice. Sometimes oligarchs rule openly. In parts of ancient Greece, power was explicitly held by a narrow group of elite citizens who controlled decision-making and protected their own interests. In other cases, especially in modern history, oligarchy is less visible. Power operates through influence rather than titles, funding political campaigns, controlling major media platforms, owning key industries, shaping which policies are even possible before the public even hears about them. What makes oligarchy unique is that it can exist inside almost any formal system. A country can call itself a democracy, hold elections and still have a small group quietly steering the most important decisions. A monarchy can be limited by law, but still surrounded by powerful families who dominate finance and policy. A republic can exist on paper, while a tight network of insiders holds the real leverage behind the scenes. History shows many versions of this. In the late Roman Republic, a handful of elite families dominated political life for generations, using wealth and connections to maintain control. In more recent times, the term oligarch has often been used to describe powerful business figures who gained massive influence over politics and industry during periods of rapid economic transition. The weakness of oligarchy is predictable. When power stays inside a small circle, decisions tend to serve that circle. Wealth and opportunity concentrate, inequality grows, and over time the wider public starts to feel the system is not fair, that the rules are written for someone else. And once people stop believing the system treats them fairly, frustration builds. That's often the moment when societies begin looking for something different, sometimes even hoping for a single strong leader who promises to break the grip of the few. Plutocracy and kleptocracy. From oligarchy, it's a small step into two darker variations where the logic of power becomes even more narrow and self-serving. These aren't always official systems written into law. They're patterns that can grow inside other structures when control concentrates around money and access. Plutocracy literally means rule by the rich. In this setup, wealth becomes the main passport to influence. Political power and economic power start to blend together. The richest groups don't necessarily need to hold office themselves. Their money shapes outcomes. They fund campaigns, influence legislation, control major industries, and set boundaries of what policies are even considered. Over time, the system begins to reflect the interests of those who can afford the most leverage. Historically, the term was often used to describe periods like the Gilded Age in the United States, when industrial magnates had enormous influence over politics and policy. Kleptocracy goes one step further. The word literally means rule by the thieves. Here, the state itself becomes a tool for extracting wealth. Leaders and insiders don't just protect their riches, they actively use political power to take public resources for private gain. Corruption isn't just occasional or hidden, it becomes embedded in how the system functions. Contracts, budgets, and state assets turn into opportunities for enrichment. The difference between the two is simple. In a plutocracy, wealthy elites shape policy to stay wealthy and protect their position. In a kleptocracy, those in power use policy as a direct method to take more. One is about influence, the other is about extraction. And in the most extreme cases, corruption stops being a side effect. It becomes the operating system. The normal way decisions get made, deals get approved, and loyalty gets rewarded. Theocracy. From systems built around money and elites, we move to a different source of authority entirely: belief. A theocracy is a form of rule where ultimate power is grounded in religion, and political decisions are tied directly to religious doctrine. Laws are not just seen as practical rules for society. They are understood as expressions of sacred principles, interpreted and enforced by religious authorities or leaders guided by them. In a theocratic structure, the line between spiritual and political power becomes very thin. Religious leaders may hold formal state roles or may sit above the political system as final arbiters. The idea is that legitimacy comes not from elections, wealth, or inheritance, but from faith and tradition. A modern example often cited is Iran, where elected institutions exist, but religious oversight is woven deeply into the political structure. Certain religious authorities hold the power to review laws, influence leadership selection, and define the boundaries of acceptable policy. It's not purely political authority, it's authority framed as a moral and spiritual guidance. Historically, theocracies were more common. In medieval Europe, parts of the continent were directly governed by church institutions. The Papal States, for example, were territories where the Pope was both a religious and a political ruler. In other regions and time periods, rulers claimed divine authority, presenting their decisions as aligned with sacred will. The strength of a theocracy is a cohesion among believers. Shared faith can create a powerful sense of unity, purpose, and moral direction. To those who see them as rooted in something higher than human opinion, But the weakness is just as strong. When politics becomes sacred, disagreement can become more than just disagreement. It can be seen as disobedience or even heresy. That makes compromise difficult. If a policy is framed as a matter of faith, changing it can feel like betraying core beliefs rather than adjusting a political decision. Technocracy. After systems built on birth, belief, wealth, or force, there's another idea that sounds very rational on paper: rule by expertise. A technocracy is a system where decisions are led by specialists, engineers, economists, scientists, and policy professionals, chosen for competence rather than elected through popular vote. The logic is simple: complex societies need technical solutions. So the people who understand systems best should be the ones steering them. Technocracy rarely appears as a full, permanent system on its own. Instead, it tends to show up during moments of pressure, when countries prioritize stability and problem-solving over politics. You often see it in crisis governments, where expert-led cabinets are brought in to manage economic lapse or major reforms. Central banks are another clear example. Institutions that control interest rates, inflation policy, and financial stability are usually run by appointed specialists, not politicians, because the decisions require deep technical knowledge and long-term planning. There also have been moments in modern history when countries temporarily handed major authority to technocratic teams. During debt crisis in parts of Europe, for example, governments brought in economists and policy experts to stabilize national finances and implement reforms. The focus shifts from campaigning and ideology to management and execution. The strength of technocracy is competence. Decisions can be more consistent, data-driven, and focused on long-term outcomes rather than short-term popularity. Planning becomes more structured and complex problems may be handled more systematically. But the weakness is legitimacy. People don't only want efficiency, they want to feel represented. They want their identity, values, and priorities reflected in leadership. A country can be well managed on paper and still feel distant or oppressive if citizens feel like decisions are being made above their heads by people they never chose and cannot easily challenge. Socialism and communism. Before we finish, it's important to clarify two terms that people often treat as forms of government, even though they began as economic and ideological frameworks. Socialism and communism are primarily about how resources are owned and distributed, but in practice they end up shaping political systems too, because whoever controls the economy holds enormous influence over society. Socialism, in its basic idea, means that the state or the public controls major resources and key industries, with the goal of reducing inequality and distributing wealth more evenly. That can take many forms. In some cases, the government directly runs large sectors like energy, transportation, or healthcare. In others, socialism exists as a mixed model, where markets still operate, but certain essential services are publicly controlled. Historically, Cuba is often cited as a strong example of a socialist system, and elements of socialism have appeared in different forms inside many countries, especially in periods of reform or reconstruction. Communism goes further. In theory, it aims for a classless society where major production is collectively owned and private control over large economic assets disappears. The long-term vision is a system where the state itself eventually becomes unnecessary because class divisions no longer exist. But in reality, the countries that officially describe themselves as communists developed strong central governments to manage this transition. Today, states that formally claim communist leadership include China, Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, and North Korea. But in practice, their systems are not identical to the original theoretical model. Many of them operate with strong one-party control, heavy state direction over key sectors, and at the same time use mixed market mechanisms. China and Vietnam, for example, allow private business while keeping major strategic areas under state influence. And this is where the pattern we've been seeing throughout the video shows up again. Labels describe the intention, behavior reveals the reality. A system that promises equality can over time develop its own rigid hierarchy. But now that hierarchy is justified and protected by ideology. Power still concentrates, but it presents itself as necessary for the greater goal. Parliamentary versus presidential systems. At this point, it's important to separate something many people mix together. These are not types of government in the big philosophical sense, like monarchy, democracy or autocracy. They are structural models. Ways the executive branch is formed and how it relates to the legislature. In other words, they answer a more technical question: who actually runs the government day to day and how do they get that power? In a presidential system, the president is both the head of state and the head of government. This means one person represents the country symbolically and also leads the executive branch that makes policy decisions. The president is usually elected separately from the legislature and serves for a fixed term. Examples include the United States, Brazil and Indonesia. This structure creates a strong, visible center of leadership and can provide stability, because the executive doesn't depend on parliament to stay in office. But the risk is concentration of authority. When too much responsibility and legitimacy are tied to one office, conflict between branches can become intense, and a powerful president can dominate the system if institutional limits weaken. In a parliamentary system, things work differently. The executive is not elected separately. Instead, it grows out of the legislature. Voters choose members of parliament, and from that body, a prime minister and cabinet are formed. The prime minister stays in power only as long as they maintain support from the parliamentary majority. Examples include the United Kingdom, Japan and Canada. This creates a tighter link between lawmaking and governing, and leadership can change without waiting for a fixed election cycle. But the trade-off is instability. Coalitions can collapse, governments can fall, and politics can become a constant process of negotiation and compromise, sometimes leading to frequent leadership changes and prolonged political conflict. Federation versus confederation. This distinction isn't about who rules, but about how a country is built geographically and politically. It answers a different question: where does power live across the territory? Is it put into one center or shared across regions? A federation is a system where power is divided between a strong central government and regional authorities that still keep meaningful autonomy. The central level handles national issues like defense, foreign policy and currency, while regions or states manage local matters such as education, policing and internal regulations. Examples include the United States, Germany, Canada and Switzerland. In these systems, the country acts as one unified state, but the internal parts still have real decision-making space. The structure is designed to balance unity with local identity, allowing different regions to operate in slightly different ways while still belonging to the same national framework. A confederation works in the opposite direction. Instead of one strong central authority sharing power downward, it's a loose union of largely independent states that coordinate with each other through a weak central body. The member units keep most of their sovereignty and agree to cooperate on specific issues like trade, defense, or movement of people. A classic historical example is the early United States under the Articles of Confederation in the late 18th century, when the central government had very limited power and most authority remained with the individual states. The system eventually proved too weak to hold the country together effectively, which led to the creation of a stronger federal structure. There isn't a perfect modern country that fits the confederation model exactly, but the European Union often gets compared to one. It isn't a single state, but a coordinated structure where independent countries share certain rules, institutions, and policies while keeping their own governments, armies, and national identities. In simple terms, federations unify power under one nation while still allowing regional control. Confederations don't unify power as much as they coordinate it, bringing separate entities together for cooperation without fully merging them into one central authority. Anarchy. At the far edge of the spectrum sits an idea that removes the center entirely. Anarchy means the absence of a central government. No single authority above society, no permanent ruling structure, no official monopoly on force. In theory, it isn't meant to mean chaos. The philosophical idea behind it is self-governance through voluntary cooperation. Communities organizing themselves, resolving disputes locally, and building order without imposed hierarchy. But theory and reality often diverge. Without a central authority, there is nothing to guarantee that rules are followed equally or that conflicts are resolved fairly. In some situations, strong local norms and tight communities can create stability. People coordinate, share resources, and maintain through mutual agreement rather than enforcement. In other situations, especially where resources are scarce or groups are in conflict, power tends to concentrate anyway. The strongest local force, a militia, a faction, a warlord, or a dominant group, can become the de facto authority, just without formal accountability. History has shown both outcomes. In certain small, isolated communities, informal systems of cooperation have worked for long periods. But in larger or more unstable environments, the absence of central structure has often led to fragmented control, with multiple groups competing for territory and influence. So anarchy doesn't automatically mean order or disorder. It can become community cooperation built on trust and shared responsibility, or it can slide into warlord competition where power belongs to whoever can hold it. Which direction it takes depends heavily on conditions, culture, and the availability of resources. And here's the twist that ties everything together. In reality, almost no government is just one clean category. Most systems are hybrids, layered combinations that evolve over time. A country might be a constitutional monarchy and a parliamentary democracy at the same time. Another might be a republic on paper, but run through a tightly controlled one-party structure. A democracy can exist with strong oligarchic influence in the background. A federation can slowly drift towards centralization as the national government gathers more authority. These aren't contradictions, they are how real systems tend to work. This is also why political labels are so powerful. They create a sense of certainty. A single word makes something complex feel simple and understandable. But that simplicity can be misleading. Calling a country a people's republic doesn't automatically mean the people truly shape decisions. Calling a system a democracy doesn't guarantee elections are competitive or meaningful. Calling a government stable doesn't necessarily mean it's secure or fair. Labels describe identity, they don't always describe behavior. So if there is one question that matters more than any title, it's this: what happens when power is challenged? When opposition appears, when criticism grows, when someone pushes back? How does the system react? Does it tolerate competition? Does it allow dissent? Does it limit itself and follow its own rules? Or does it tighten control, silence critics, and punish resistance? That reaction is the real test. Not the name, not the constitution, but what happens the moment power is forced to defend itself. So if you want a simple mental tool to understand any country, start with 4 better questions. Who actually holds power? How do they keep it? Through elections, money, fear, religion, party control? What limits them? Courts, constitution, media, opposition, regions? And most importantly, Can the system correct itself? If a system can adapt, replace leaders, and fix mistakes without breaking apart, it's resilient. If it can't, if power can't be challenged or adjusted, then it's fragile, even if it looks strong from the outside. Because power without limits rarely stays the same. Over time it grows, concentrates, and turns into something else. Thanks for watching! Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below telling us what type of government your country has. See you in the next video!